drift fishing. I don't know if anybody's ever drift fished, but it's usually you just drift blind into inlets or creeks or stuff like that, just trying to cover as much different bottom as you can. There's also, I call it power drift fishing, or you can use an electric motor, or even some people use their motor, just run it in reverse just to slow them down a little bit. And then some people troll. And trolling is, I don't really like trolling because I think you go too fast, but they catch a lot of fish. You know, they cover a lot of ground also. But then my favorite is just anchoring up. I like to anchor up on structure, and I think you can cover the bottom better that way. But anyway, I'll start off with drift fishing, and if you have a question, just go ahead and ask whatever. Can everybody hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, good. Basically, I use the same tackle, same rod and reels, everything for any kind of flounder fishing. I might adjust the weights or the type of weights I use. For drift fishing, I like to use a bank sinker because I think it acts more like a keel instead of like an egg sinker sits on your line and rolls. A bank sinker acts like a keel, and your line don't twist up as bad. It'll bounce along the bottom like that and keep your line just that much farther off the bottom, and it's easier to change out. I mean, I use about a 1 ounce sinker usually if I can. I try to get away with as light a weight as possible. Even drift fishing, anchoring, power drifting, whatever. But I think everybody's pretty much knows how to drift fish because it's pretty simple. You just put a bait out and just drift with the current. And one thing about drift fishing I'm not real fond of is if you get a bite, you have to be able to let it go, give it some slack, give him time to eat it. And that's hard to do drift fishing. Let's see.
When you do put your bank sinker on your rig for drift fishing, do you use one of those slides?
No, I run the line through the eye of the bank sinker.
Oh.
So what's a bank sinker exactly? What is that?
It's just it's like a teardrop weight.
It's got a ring on the top of it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And you just run
Not a brass, it's solid brass, solid lead, excuse me.
Yeah.
I think there's these teardrop sinkers got a brass eye on it that goes through it. I don't really use those, but they work just as good. I think they might cost a little bit more, but I just use a real lead bank sinker. In fact, I have a mold I pour them on. And,
what do you put a bead above the swivel?
I like
sliding
to.
Through?
I like to. I run out of beads a lot because I break off a lot. But I think the bead keeps the sinker from beating on your knot so bad. But I think that helps protect your line a little bit. And that's another thing, you need to check that continuously because the sinker sliding up your down your line will wear the line out eventually, especially if you're in a lot of rocks. And the rocks and the shells on top of that sinker, it'll wear your line out pretty quick. But,
you use live bait mostly when you on that rig, or
that's all I like to use is live bait.
Is live bait?
Yes. I mean, I have used dead bait, but I don't like to. I love to use live bait. Another thing with drift fishing, it's better to use a smaller bait because, like I said, the flounder don't have as much time to grab a hold of it because it's going by pretty quick. Especially when the tide's running pretty good. When the tide eases up, you might could get by with a bigger bait, but you just need to use the right size bait and the right size hook. You don't want a great big hook on a little bitty bait, and you don't want a little bitty hook on a great big bait. Yes, sir.
You fish in the river any?
I fish the river, the waterway, the oceans, the inlets.
Okay. My question is, drift fishing or any kind of, like you're talking about live bait fishing, what are you doing about that grass in there now? All that grass.
Fight it.
You just move, just give up and...
I have eventually. Sometimes if you can't fish, you can't fish it. I know in the river it's been pretty bad here in the last couple of weeks.
Oh gosh, awful.
That real spidery stuff, yeah. And before that it was that green lettuce. And that stuff, I hate that stuff just as bad. It's heavy. But That's another thing with the bank sinker. I think it rides over some of that sometimes.
Build an egg center.
Yeah.
You get a lot of sharks. I seem to get a lot of sharks drifting.
Yeah.
I can't keep them off.
A lot of times the sharks, when they hatch, you know, they give live birth. And there's some when the big sharks come into the river to spawn, you can't fish somewhere. Sometimes there's so many of them little baby sharks about that long.
Yeah, all summer long drifting. That's all I get is sharks.
Drifting in the river or
Yeah.
where? In the river?
Well, I mean, same thing, casting, power drift.
Anchored up though, I don't seem to get them. But
Really?
when I'm
Are
drifting,
you anchoring up in deeper water?
yeah,
Seems like the
probably.
sharks are bad in the shallower water,
They're
up
probably
around
the
grass banks and little places like that. I'll move to deeper water if they're real bad. But, you know, sometimes the fish are up there in the shallows where the bait is. Recently, most of my flounder I've caught so far this year have been on the grass on plastic, throwing plastic baits, lures and stuff, you know. Plastic shrimp like a DOA or something like that. But the only thing about those DOAs, they're so light, you can't have any wind to fish them. But I'd rather fish live bait. I've fished baits. I fished a bank with DOA and caught one or two and go back with bait and catch 12 or 15. But drift fishing is not my favorite way to do it, but it is effective in certain situations. Like I said, the only thing I got against drift fishing mainly is the bait moves so fast. The bigger fish aren't going to move as much as the smaller fish, so you catch more smaller fish drifting, in my opinion. Of course, anything I say, there's always an exception. I mean, you can catch a big fish in that deep of water or in 40 foot of water. Same way, you know, with small fish. But I think you catch smaller fish as a whole drifting and trolling. And power drifting, that's probably my second favorite way of fishing is I use electric motor. And most of the time I use electric motor just to slow me down when I'm fishing a bank in the inlet or in the river, grass banks, whatever. You can use the electric motor to hold you over a ledge, or there might be a point where there's a rip coming around that point. That's a natural feeding station for flounder. Anytime you can find a rip on a point like that, and you can see the current, and there's some deep water close by, that's a feeding station. They'll always put their nose into the current waiting for that bait to come around that corner with that current. And you know how when bait comes around a point a lot of times there's a little back eddy, the bait will roll into that back eddy and stage in there, hold up out of the current for a little bit. That's a natural feeding station for a flounder. Always give those a lot of care. You know, cover them real good. But that's power drift fishing. Drift fishing, you don't really get to fish those spots too much. You might because you go by them so fast. But if you're power drift fishing or anchor up, you can anchor up on these points also. But let's see, talking about power drift fishing now. Another place I like to power drift fish is the jetty. Any kind of rock structure like that holds fish. I mean, Wrightsville Beach jetty is a prime example. It's hard to power drift fish if the wind's blowing real bad. That's the only thing about power drift fishing with electric motor is the wind. But I've caught some nice fish on the jetties, and you very seldom see anybody flounder fishing out there. But I think a lot of people are afraid of the rocks. Of course, I am too. But the way you power drift fish is just like the points and the ledges is you use the electric motor or your motor to, with the 4 strokes as quiet as they are now. They work great too. It's just hold your boat up against the current or slow it down where you can let that bait sit in that spot longer instead of just going through there real fast. And if it's a real nice spot, I mean, I would pull back up and go back through there again, especially if you catch a fish or have a bite. That's another thing about flounders is they're not real smart. I mean, I've caught flounders with 2 liters in their mouth before, and I've had them set the hook and break them off or something, my leader broke or whatever, and go back there and catch them, and my leader's still in his mouth. But power drift fishing is, you can use that in the, like I said, you can use it on the grass, in the waterways, the cuts, the inlets, around docks. It work great around docks. Trolling, I'm not a real big fan of trolling, but there's a lot of people who do real great at it. I just don't have the patience for it. A lot of guys in Brunswick County, you might see the boats, they got the big spreader bars across the back of their boat and rod holders sticking everywhere. I've seen them with 8 rod holders across the back of them. I don't know how they fish those rods, but they do. But they'll just troll down up and down the creeks and the rivers and the waterways. And if you think about it, it makes sense because they're covering a big area of bottom with that spread like that. But they have to use a little bit heavier lead and a smaller bait. And since they're trolling, they're not waiting to set the hook. The fish has got to grab it and bite and set the hook itself. The boat sets the hook. And that's one reason I'm not fond of that. But I can't say anything because I've seen them catch a lot of fish. Plus, they can cover a lot of area. I mean, I've seen them go up Lockwood Folly River 2 or 3 miles and come all the way back down in the middle, and they're all day long they do that, and they'll catch fish.
Are those guys just trolling Carolina rigs just like you would cast?
Basically, I think they're using the same rig. They might use like a flounder tackle with a long torpedo sinker, like a bead chain.
Yeah.
Just something to keep the line from twisting up so bad. I think a bank sinker wouldn't work that great because it would kind of come up off the bottom too much. But they use a little bit. I think egg sinkers work great for that because they will get down. And since you're trolling, you don't have to worry about them, the sinkers rolling. I'll go over to that when I get to anchor up and fishing because. But the trolling, they have to use a little bit more lead to keep it on the bottom, especially in the current when the river's running pretty good. And they use a smaller bait. But like I said, the plus to trolling is they're covering a lot of area. And they're covering a big area on the bottom because they got 4, 5, 6, 8 baits in a swath that goes through there, and they don't miss much. But if the current's running real hard, like I said, it's hard for them to keep the bottom. And then let's go talk about, anchoring up. That's which is my favorite. Anchoring up fishing is probably my favorite. I like to go out in the ocean and anchor up on these reefs. I like to do that in the summertime when it gets hot inside. Seems like the fish inside get kind of finicky. But in the ocean, that deeper water, they feed better. And I've caught some nice fish on them reefs out there. I mean, there's several reefs around here. I fish Figure 8 Reef, Liberty Ship, 5-mile boxcars, 10-mile boxcars, the Marriott Reef. There's a whole bunch of blockade runners down there off Fort Fisher, if you can get the numbers of them. The Ella. There are about 3 reefs off Long Beach, and they're getting ready to build another one down around Ocean Crest, I believe. Anywhere from 30 to 40 feet to 60 to 70 feet, I've caught flounder. And usually you catch nicer fish out there also. I like to use a finger mullet out there because the menhaden, the pinfish and stuff are so bad that they tear the menhaden up pretty much. But the only thing about fishing on them reefs out there is you're going to lose a lot of tackle. Just plan on losing some tackle. What I like to do is I'll make short casts and fish it back to me. Just fan out around it. And of course, the first thing you do is when you mark the reef, anchoring is real critical when you're anchor fishing because you have to be in the right position. What I like to do on the reefs is anchor up current from the structure and get down. I'll try to drop back down until I'm on top of it and then pull back up in front of it so I can fish straight down next to the reef or whatever it is. And then You know, you do that, you're gonna get some pinfish bites, you're gonna get some, right now, probably sea bass will wear you out. But, sometimes you'll catch a flounder right off the bat, but usually it's just like a grouper bite. The pinfish start biting on your minnows and wear them out, and then next thing you know, a little bit bigger fish will bite, and then you might get 4 or 5 flounder in a row, boom, boom, boom. Then it might slide off a little bit. But you just have to just be patient. If you're on structure, just be patient where you're at. Don't keep fish 5 or 10 minutes and move, because they can smell just like the other fish. They smell that bait being eaten in that scent in the water, and they'll come to it. Especially, that's why I like to anchor off the reef just a little bit and fish straight down and cast to it and just work back in a fan. Another little trick I like to do on the reefs is when I start, I like to put a rod straight down. I got a little rod holder where the rod will stick out off the side of the boat like that. And I'll fish maybe a 2-ounce sinker right there. Fish it straight down, just let it hang on, just bump the bottom like that with the boat. And what happens is, as you're casting out and doing these little trees back, sometimes the flounder might not be feeding in a real good mood or whatever. They'll just be kind of picky, and they'll follow that bait back. Well, you know, you don't know he's following it, so you get it up to under the boat, you reel it up and cast it again. Well, that fish stops right there. He just don't turn around and go back. He'll just lay down right there, and next thing you know, you see that rod go. I've caught so many fish doing that, it ain't even funny.
You ever use some of the bigger flounder I've cut open have pinfish in them? Do you ever use pinfish for?
Not unless I have to. They do eat them. I will agree. They do eat them.
Big ones. They eat.
Yeah, I've seen them with pinfish this
Yeah.
big and croakers that big.
Yeah.
It's amazing how big a fish they can eat, but it's hard to fish those big baits also. And
How big is
pinfish.
too big for a mullet to use?
I've used them that long before when I was fishing
Or
for a
flounder?
big fish. You don't catch a lot of fish like that. I mean,
Big bait, big fish, but
that's right. But when you fish a big bait like that, you're cutting out these nice fish like that. I mean, they might bite it, but they're holding on to it, and you're going to set the hook, and you're just going to pull back a scaled minnow. That's all you're going to do. I like a finger mullet about like that, or a pogey, you know, about like that, 4 or 5 inch pogey. This time of year, I like pogies the best, because that's what's predominantly in the river and the waterways. In the fall, I like to go to a mullet. I think the mullets, when they're running that grass bank, I think that's what they're feeding on. But
What's the biggest flounder you've got in the ocean?
in the ocean, 12 pounds. Usually the bigger fish show up in the fall when they're moving out. I've caught flounder in December, January on them wrecks, because I don't know, but I still think there's flounders stay in the river year round. In fact, I know they do, because the giggers see them. They're just not real big. But I think the bigger fish move offshore during the winter. Like I said, this is just me now. I don't know. I'm not a scientist or anything, but from what I've heard and see, and my experiences over the years, is I think the flounders start moving out in October, November, and they start staging on them reefs. And as it gets colder and colder, they move farther off. Like in January and February, they might be at WR4 or something, because I know the divers see them. And I've caught them that far before, going bottom fishing, when you could bottom fish in the winter.
How far up the river do the flounder move?
Though it depends on how fresh water. Like right now, they could be above wind. I'll put it this way: they're in Sutton Lake, and you know how they got in Sutton Lake? When they pull water out of the river, in a drought, and the lake gets down, they have to keep that lake at a certain level. They'll pull water out of the river into Sutton Lake, and that's how there's flounder, there's blue crabs in there. In that hot ditch, I hooked flounder there about like that one day. We were bass fishing, and I had a minnow on a float, and I seen a flounder print in the sand on the bank in that hot ditch, and especially when you walk down there and fish in that ditch, or canal rather. And I looked up and down there, and I looked up under kind of grass came up out of off the bank like that, and there was two of them laying about like that, right here under my feet almost. I put the man in front of them, just that quick. So here I am with no leader, 10, 12 pound test line straight in his mouth already. So when I said, well, what can I got to lose? Like I said, if he took off that quick. And when he took off, the other one scared the other. But I know of one guy caught an 8 pound at the back bridge in Sutton Lake, in the mouth of that intake ditch. So there's flounder in there too. I don't know how big they are, but I know that 8 pound one, and those I saw were at least 4 or 5 pounds. But as far as going up the river, my grandfather caught one brim fishing in the Black River one time about that big. I mean, it was a small one, but who knows how far they go up. I mean, they can take the fresh water, it's obvious, but I do think that there's fish stay in that river year round. And it's got to be southern flounders. Everybody knows there's two kinds of flounder, southern and summer. And Gulf, actually there's three, Gulf too. You don't see a whole lot of Gulf. But most, the summer and the Gulf flounder are usually in the ocean and in the inlets. And most of the summer flounder are in the rivers and up the rivers and Snow's Cut, places like that, usually southern flounder.
Hey Fred, will you go, and I don't know who knows this, but will you go through what happens when that flounder, when you're anchored up, and that flounder takes that bait? What, how do you do that? I can't set the hook. That's most people's biggest problem is setting the hook when a flounder bites. You don't need to set the hook when he bites. Especially anchoring up fishing, and the bigger the bait you use, when you feel them bite, you're just gonna feel and it just nothing. It just occasionally they'll bite it and move off a little bit, but if you put it in free spool or give him some line, he ain't gonna go far and he's gonna lay back down. And what I like to do is after I feel a thump or think it is, and you ain't gonna feel it all the time either. If he hits coming at you, you're not gonna feel nothing. You're just gonna feel like you're hung. What I like to do is it's hard to explain, but is see if I can pick the sinker up off the bottom. If he's got the hook in his mouth, you ought to be able to bounce that sinker. I mean, you can't pull. You don't want to just pull real hard. You want to just see if you can ease that sinker up and bounce it like that. If you do that, that means your sinker's not hung. It's your hook. Either your hook is hung or a flounder's got it. One or the other. That's a trick a lot of people don't know about. But if you can just try to feel that sinker bounce, and it's not hard to do. But if you ever feel it a couple times, you'll get the hang of it. But like I said, as far as how long to wait, it depends on what side of the bait I'm using. If I'm using, it's hard to catch decent bait that day, and I'm using smaller baits, then I might give him, just wait a little bit, just count down to 5 or something, and if it's a bigger bait, I might count 15, 20 seconds, 30 seconds.
In 40 to 80 foot, you're using braid?
Yes. Yep. I also might bump up my sinkers in 40 foot of water, and there's any kind of wind or wave action, you have to use a little bit heavier sinker. I usually use a level wind rod for that, with plenty of backbone. I don't know if you've ever caught a flounder in 40 foot of water, but a 5 pound one feels like he's 10. You can just about, I mean, you set the hook and he don't move because they got all that leverage, and you'll swear he weighs 10 pounds. When he gets up there and he's like this, you're just disappointed.
No, I wouldn't be disappointed. Don't worry. That might be you. Do you find when you're in the ocean, do you find them around the structure, or are they right up on the structure? Because I'm thinking you moved them off the structure following bait.
Yeah. Yeah. They, both. I mean, I have sometimes is cast out down the side of the structure. If you can figure out how the structure's laying,
That's key too, because you're gonna stay hung up if you don't know where the structure is. But just I use short cast, that way I can kind of figure out where it's at. You feel it there and you feel it and then you get it out. It's just try to fan cast and go out too, because sometimes if there's a big swell, they might lay out a little bit because of that swell hitting that wreck and rolls that current off. I don't know if you'll ever notice, anytime you fish on a wreck or something like that, it's like a certain depth. Then when you closer you get to the wreck, it just kind of gets a little bit deeper around that wreck from the water action pushing off of it. And they might be on that little ledge where it drops off into that little shallow depression where the wreck is. Especially around these blockade runners, you need to do that. And plus some areas there's just pieces of wreck all over the place. Like it's broken up so much, it's just not one big piece anymore. You cast out like that and just reel it back, and you might get hung up a little bit, but you're gonna catch some fish doing that also.
And when you see structure like that, it's more obvious. But say, take the Marriott Reef you were talking about. What am I looking for?
Try to get to the edge.
To the edge of the
edge, because if
bank.
you fish on top of the rocks, most of that's just about all concrete. If you fish in top of the rocks, you're gonna stay hung up.
I got a nice anchor and chain to prove that.
Well, when you get to these wrecks, you just throw the kid overboard with a mask on and he can draw a picture of what it looks like, right?
Yep, you got a kid without a dive that deep.
My kids are not allowed to go fishing with you. Just for the record.
About a specific hook.
There ain't but one hook for me. That's a kale hook. I use a flounder hook. I've tried circle hooks. I've tried these live bait hooks. These Flounder 042, kind of a wide bend, offset a little bit. And I tried circle hooks one day, and I made myself use them. And I had 6 bites that day, and I caught 2 fish on circle hooks. So I quit using them.
I threw mine away too. I did.
I don't know what it is about a circle hook and a flounder. I don't know if it's because the flounder's mouth is like this, laying down there, and the circle hook, I just couldn't get them to hook it. I mean, I had them on for a little bit, but then I went back to a flounder hook, and my ratio went back up to about 90%.
Now, is it effective to drop a chum bag?
I've tried that, and I can't say yay or nay, to be honest with you. I've tried it though. In the ocean, I wouldn't do it.
To the bottom? You dropped it all the way to the bottom?
Yeah, and I had a shark taking one of them too. And especially around them wrecks and stuff, you're gonna hook some big sharks. I think we've caught several 7 or 8 foot sand tigers, and as soon as you bite it, he takes off with it. You know, you hook him. I've hooked him right in the side of the mouth and fought him for an hour. It's just one of those things. The mono wasn't hitting his teeth or anything, so you ended up having to fight the thing or break him off. One thing about those reefs, though, you might catch trout one day. You might have gray trout, speckled trout, big drum, big sea bass. I've caught some groupers out there doing that. Of course, you're a little undergunned for grouper and some of them big drum, them 40, 50-pound drum, but around them reefs this time of year, or especially a little bit later in summer, there's no telling what you're going to catch. It's a good place to take kids because they'll stay busy. And like I said, that rod straight down is going to catch you a big fish.
You talked about pogies and finger mullet. You don't like shrimp inside?
Nope.
No.
Pinfish are too bad. Mud minnows are fine if you can get them big enough. I mean, I don't like them little things like that.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you another good bait, them tiger minnows. I call them tiger minnows. I think there's a Zamboni or something. But they look like a striped ape. Some people call them striped apes. They're hard to catch in a quantity, but you can't kill them. I've caught 2 and 3 flounder off the same minnow before with those.
Float rig any?
Yep. If I'm fishing the grass and there's a lot of oyster shells and stuff, I'll use a popping cork with a minnow. Just fish it, just barely try to keep it off the bottom. Not very often though, because they got to have a place left. The oyster shells are real thick
they can't kind of lay on the oyster shells. They have to go to the edge, and that's why I like to fish. I just fish the edge. I just won't get up in the shells. Now, if I was fishing for drum or trout, by all means, I'd fish right on top of them, especially on the rising tide. See if I've covered pretty much everything I've done. I have. Anchored inshore, I think there's a lot of places inshore like a ledge. On the turn of the tide, they'll change positions when the tide turns. I don't know if everybody knows that, but they always face into the current. That's kind of misleading too, but I always try on a rising tide. I always think they get up on top of the ledges and wait for the fish to come to them where that tide's rising, pulls it up out of the bottom on the top. And on the falling tides, I think they'll lay on the deep side of these ledges and stuff, where the water's getting shallower, the bait comes off that and goes down into that ledge. Depending on which way the ledge is facing, we're in the current. Points, grass points, rocky points, jetties and stuff like that, anytime you see that current coming around, and if there's enough current there to make a back eddy, you need to hit that spot. You need to cover it real good, because that is a good spot. Any kind of back eddy like that, that's a staging place for bait to hold in that area. And
Now, will they be right in the back eddy?
no,
Okay.
they'll be laying right in that edge. There's a seam where it comes around, and the water's gonna come and roll back like this. They're gonna be laying right in that edge on that seam. I call it a seam, but it's right where on the edge of the current.
Mm-hmm.
They might be laying right in the middle of the current too, especially, but in the back eddy it's where the bait is, and your bait's gonna swing in there too. If you're fishing that edge, your bait's gonna get kicked in that eddy. Basically, what you're trying to do is get the current to take your bait in a natural evolution, the way the bait
Just
would be.
pitch it in the front end of it and let it roll through there.
And
Now, are you using a bank sinker for that?
definitely,
Okay.
because that's where I've got my line tangled up with egg sinkers so much, because if you're letting it do that, your bait's rolling on, that sinker's rolling on the bottom.
Okay.
And I think, to me, I have a problem with coming back and my line's twisted up, my bank sinker hanging like that. My bait's up here. With that bank sinker, it don't roll. As long as you keep your line tight, you need to feel like I said, I'm bouncing my sinker. It don't have a chance to do that. With an egg sinker, if it just rolls a little bit, it just twists up.
How much a leader?
Huh?
How much a leader?
It depends. Around wrecks and stuff like that, I don't like to use about 12 to 14 inches. And if I'm in, say, like a place that's not real snaggy, or like grass banks and stuff, I might use 18 to 20. The reason being is, if you got a long leader and the snags, it gives your men more time to get around something. But if it's a clear bottom, pretty much that, I'll move it and let it sit there for a little while, and that minnow's he's gonna be swimming around. He's on a tether, basically. You just staking him out on the bottom. He's just covering the bottom, and you just move it and let him move around again, just move it again, let him cover that bottom. And the longer leader lets him, give him a little bit bigger area to cover. Yes, sir.
And when you're talking about fishing that point, are you anchored there or are you drifting?
Both. I mean, you can fish. I like to power drift the points, but I like to anchor the most.
So would you anchor downstream and pitch up and then bring it back through that current, or would you?
I like to anchor pretty much parallel, so you can throw it up and let it come all the way through, and then give it a chance to roll into that back eddy. If you throw it, I don't like to cast up current, because if there's many snags at all, you're gonna stay hung up, because you got all the current pushing your line down, and the sinker's gonna pull right into a snag or log, soft wood, whatever, and you can't get it off unless you get up above it, and then you can get it off. Like I said, I like to let it roll around, and then after that, then I might cast down the bank and bring it into that back eddy, coming down around the edge of where it drops off. And then sometimes I just throw it out there in that current and let it sit, and then just fish that little point where it comes around like that. Because the fish might stage back from the points on too. You need to cover the whole area, not just right in that one little area. Just fish out from it also.
You like the boat docks on the waterway?
Yes.
How about when they dredge one?
When they do what?
Well, I mean, they're dredging our marina right now with a backhoe, you know?
Uh-huh.
And they're creating those banks, but I mean, you gotta let the water settle out for a while.
I can't stand to fish mud.
Yeah.
I don't even like to fish real soft bottom, that silty bottom.
Yeah.
I don't think the fish lay in it that much.
I don't know when the water will clear up.
It won't take long. When they finish dredging, they'll take two
Well,
or
that
three
sharp
tides.
bank they're leaving, you know, it's gonna have to roll off, and it's just over the weekend when they're not working, it's still muddy in there.
It will take a few tides to get rid of. But
All right, so we need specifics here, because I'm kind of slow, and I've got 3 impatient young boys. And so let's say I'm coming down to Maysboro Boatyard. Would you go down the waterway and hit a few docks, and then maybe move over to the sound side, or would you just head straight to the river and start there?
I would head straight to the river unless, if it's the top of the tide's starting to fall, I would fish all them creek mouths coming out of Masonburg Sound over there.
From a high tide to maybe half tide.
Yeah.
It's falling out.
Yeah. Yep. I would fish anywhere. You know, a lot of that water gets muddy after it gets on down.
Mhm.
Well, when it's like that, I'm done. I can't fish the mud. I don't have the patience to fish it. But a high tide on it, for a half a tide out, I would fish any of the mouths or ditches or whatever where that water's coming out of those creeks, because the bait goes up in there on high tide and it comes out on the fall. And those flounders are going to stage in the mouth of these ditches and creeks and openings where that current comes out of them, those shallow water. Same thing on points and stuff. I mean, if it's a big area, you can go farther up in there, fish, just fish all those. Fish all the little feeder creeks that comes off the side of those bigger areas.
So outside of that, you run to the river.
Not necessarily. The inlet's good. Inlets, jetties. I like to fish the docks. If the current's not running real hard where I can use an electric motor, I don't want to just anchor up and fish one dock. I like to fish, work that dock, move to the next dock, work it. And I mean, I fish every pile.
Really?
Yep.
You use this method, you just drop it down beside the pile,
If I can.
walk it a little bit around it.
If the current's running where I can get the nose of the boat up there, I like to fish, you always fish the downside current to start with. And it's just bumping along behind them pilings, just like you're on the pier walking down things. That's the same principle.
So you start on the slack side of the pile?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the thinking behind that?
That back end, they're laying up there behind that piling out of the current.
So
Okay, they're waiting for it to wrap around. Right
It
there.
wraps around, well, that gives that little eddy, is a place for a bait to get up behind it and get out of the current. I don't know if you ever
He's sitting
seen
there
sheephead,
looking
you know how
at the
sheephead to get around behind it? And the bait, if you ever watch minnows and there's a lot of current, you'll see them get in there and rest for a little while and then move on.
Interesting. How do you approach nose cut? How do you fish the infamous nose cut without losing 18,000 rigs?
I lose 18,000 rigs. I bet I've lost 100 pounds of sinker in there.
Yeah.
But,
That's just part
I
of
mean,
it.
I've probably caught my biggest fish out there also.
Do you fish against the bank in that structure? You just float right in the middle, or what's the?
I don't fish down the middle. I fish the ledges, the points, the bridge, the grass banks that are deep. You know how some of them are shallow, but I like to fish those sod banks where it comes off and it drops off 4 or 5 foot.
Like on the right side as you're going to the river, that hard bank on the right.
That's great. That point out there is about pretty much gone now, but that point was one of my favorite spots to fish for. Pretty much the currents have washed it away now. I've caught over. I've caught 3 fish in the cut over 12 pounds. And I don't know if you remember, my buddy, we was fishing that Cape Fear tournament. Yeah, they had it 2 years, but he caught a 15-3 in there. And then everybody knows that the state record came out of there also, but I don't know if they know the story behind it.
I don't.
The story behind the state record in the cut is a guy fishing down there by the bridge, between the bridge and the boat ramp, on that side, the Carolina Beach side, and I think it weighed 20-some pounds. He was fishing with bloodworms.
What was he fishing?
He wasn't flounder fishing either.
No, he wasn't flounder fishing. He was
yeah.
spot fishing.
Okay.
So, do you think that flounder eat that bloodworm?
Flounder at a spot.
He ate a spot. That guy had a spot on reeling him in. That flounder grabbed that spot.
Did you catch him on a Zebco 33 too?
I don't know about that. I just know the story. They say, oh yeah,
Wow.
he was using bloodworms. That flounder was caught on a bloodworm, and I'll never believe that as long as I live.
My son caught one on that little fish bites, that
Yeah.
big bloodworm
My
stuff. He
daughter
didn't catch
caught
a
one.
flounder on
My
that.
daughter caught one at the jetty, about a 2-pounder on a piece of fish bite. But I just find it hard to believe a 20-pound flounder would eat something
That small.
that little.
But they're dumb animals, you said it.
Yeah, they are. I bet. I mean, you can pull it away from him, throw it back, and he's still there.
Opportunistic feeders is what I've
Yep.
been told. You get the bait in front of them and they'll eat.
Yep.
I think any fish that can get gigged is gone.
Well, you can't say that because when it gets cold, they can gig trout and drum.
Good point.
We get you if you'll sit still.
What kind of knot do y'all like to use? I mean, personally, I like to use a uni knot. It's pretty much all around, universal knot. I tie my rigs, my hooks to it. I use it to tie hooks and swivels. And even when I'm trout fishing or something like that, I like to use a uni knot to connect fluorocarbon to my jig and everything, and my main line.
So you use the uni to uni to connect your braid to your floor?
Yes, the only thing about, when I'm connecting lines together, I like to use about six twists instead of 4. Normally I just use 4 twists on a uni knot, but when I do line to line, I like to use about six loops.
Fred, will you go ahead and go over your type rods you use?
Yep. Let y'all pass those around if you want to. I like to use a rod with some backbone because a flounder's got when he bites a minnow, he's holding on for dear life. I mean, he don't want that thing to get away. And I've set hooks a lot of times and just get him all the way back, and you put it in the boat, he just and lets it go. That's another reason why I think they're so stupid. They don't even know they're hooked. But actually they're not hooked. They're just holding on to the bait.
They don't let go till they see you.
That's right. And what it is, they got a grip on that fish so hard that you didn't move the bait, you just moved him. I mean, they're just laying on the bottom. If it's especially a 2 or 3 pound, you can move them pretty easy. In fact, going back to feeling that sinker bounce like that, sometimes I felt and I slid them. Feel him move just a little bit. If I feel him move, I drop it real quick. I don't want to put no pressure on him. If you do that, try to check, see if you can bounce your sinker. You're going to slide one every now and then, but I've never had one drop it because of that. But I don't want to take any chances. Also, I use braid line. I used to use mono all the time, but since I went to braid, I've gone back to mono, and it's just like fishing with a rubber band to me. But and it holds up a lot better in gels and stuff like that.
What is that, about 20?
Yeah.
Power Pro?
Power Pro. I like to use Power Pro. It's a little bit stiffer. It don't wrap around your tip as bad like spider wire. And the worst is Tough Line. I mean, Tough Line's a good name for that because it's tough. You can't hardly break it, but you cast into the wind one time, and next thing you know, you go to reel, and it's already wrapped around the tip. It's just so loose and limber. The Power Pro is just a little bit stiffer. It don't wrap around your tip near as bad. It will loosen up as you use it some, but it's still a lot stiffer than spider wire right out of the box. Shimano, I like Shimano's. I've had good luck with that. I think it's a good product. Power Pro, I use Eagle Claw Kale hooks. Here recently, I've liked these black nickel Kale hooks. The bronze hooks, you use them one time, next weekend they're rusty. The black nickel hooks hold up a little bit better, I think. I like to use a 2-aught as a general rule. I have used 4-aughts on up to and down to 1-aughts, just depending on the size of the bait.
Black nickel.
Black nickel 2-aught.
I think Bass Pro carries. I buy them by the 50 because I use a lot of tackle. That's another thing. I don't know if everybody makes pre-rigs or tackles before they go, but I like to have enough tackles made up where I don't have to make tackles when I'm fishing. I mean, if I lose one, I got them in a bag. I try to keep about a dozen in a plastic bag so they don't get wet. And I'm ready. All I got to do is a sinker and my leader, and I'm ready to go. I tie one knot, and I'm back in the business. If you're on a bite, then you save a lot of time and have to fish out a sinker, a hook, a swivel, cut a piece of leader, tie all that stuff together. I mean, you just save a ton of time by having your tackle pre-made.
What do you like for artificial?
Bucktail, white bucktail are great. I like to use these chartreuse curly tails, the old curly tail jigs with the swimming action. They work pretty good. I think Jimmy Price used to have some artificial tournaments in Southport, and we used to fish those a lot and did pretty good with the curly tails. But I prefer a bucktail or and lately here I've been using the DOA shrimps.
Just fish it heavy enough for it to stay bump the bottom?
Yep. Yep. The only thing about the DOA shrimps is you can't fish a heavy line. You got to use nothing over 10. And if there's any wind at all, you can just forget it. Because just the wind on your line, pull it off the bottom. You can't even feel the bottom with the DOA shrimp. They're a real pain to fish, and it's real. Conditions have to be perfect to fish them.
So you're not adding any weight to them. You're just trying to fish them just like they come out of it.
Yeah, just like they come out of things. They got a little bit of weight in them. I think they're a quarter ounce.
I've never successfully fished those things because they're so light.
That's correct. They're hard to get to learn how to fish.
So you don't fish a DOA on the end of a standard live bait rig?
On a popping cork?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Or
even with a egg sinker or anything like that on a Carolina rig? No.
No. If I'm using the egg sinker, I'm going to use a live bait.
Okay, me and Walker are stupid back here. Neither one of us want to ask, but will you show us the uni knife?
Sure. Glad you asked.
Really, I know what it is, but Walker doesn't.
I remember
Not
triple
we'll-
granny. We'll watch real closely.
Here's a swivel, whatever. Do it like this. Get your big loop like that. Pull the tag in. Like that. And that's it. Just make sure you pull that tight and just snug it up like that. And I think there's only one knot that beats this on the strength test, and that's a Palomar, I think.
And you only do 4 wraps
Yeah, 4 wraps on
Power Pro?
on this.
Okay.
Yep. 4 wraps.
Did you double Power Pro up before you tie it in a uni knot? Or did you just do it?
No,
How
I
do
just
you-
single.
Even when you're doing your fluorocarbon to braid, you're just single, you know what I'm saying? When you're joining fluorocarbon to braid with that, are you doubling up the braid before you tie the knot?
All right. Can you tie the braid? I mean, the splicing braid?
Yeah.
I'll
use both ends of it and do it like that.
You did know our stupid questions are on tape, right?
Yeah, that's all right, Spence.
So you won't,
I'm asking
take
your
the braids directly to the little swivel that's on your Flounder, your Carolina rig? You won't do that? Or you-
Yeah. I mean, I've got
Yeah, he's just talking
On
about when
that.
you go leader to Power Pro.
from swivel to hook is my fluorocarbon, and from my swivel, that's where I tie the Power Pro,
Okay,
and the sinker will slide up and down my braid.
gotcha.
I'll lay these out like that. Take this one, do that. I'm gonna cut the knots down just to save time. The loops,
Oh, so you do individual on each end of it.
and then just pull that tight, and then go to the other side, do the same thing. And with braid, it's a small knot anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
I try to snug these up like that before I pull them together. And you got that?
And that's a strong knot for braid to fluorocarbon?
Yep. I've had good luck with it. Now, if I'm doing this with braid, I like to use 6 loops. Because it will slip. The line is so, that braid is, the Power Pro is so slick, it will slip if you don't use enough wraps. And like I said, you pull this tag end down as tight as you can get it before you snug it up and pull it together like that. Anybody else got any questions?
You said 1 ounce bank sinkers were your go-to normally?
Yeah, I don't like to use more than one because one thing about the Carolina rig like that, you catch a lot of drum and trout fishing for flounder just like you do fishing. I mean, as long as that sinker will slide it down the line, you catch a lot more trout. If you don't have
It's basically like a trout rig.
exactly
Slider.
Yeah, that's just the same thing. If you're using a sinker that don't slide, or like say it's pegged off like the bass guys, if a trout doesn't hit it, if he hits it soft and feels that sinker and moves that sinker, then he's gonna drop it. I mean, I don't know if you ever heard of a bait walker. I don't use them much anymore, but I used to make those and fish around the rocks. But they're so hard to make. But there's a couple on the market you can buy. It's called a bait walker. It's like it's number 15 wire. It's in shape like that. One side's got the sinker on it. In the middle, there's a loop. That's where you tie your line. And on this side, there's a swivel on the end of it. You tie your leader on that. I still use them occasionally, but it's such a pain to make them now. I don't even hardly mess with them anymore.
And you do that around rocks?
Around rocks. All that does, basically what it does, it keeps your bait about that much higher off the bottom, because your leg off the swivel, where your line's tied to, is about that long, with a sinker on the bottom of that, and it's real narrow.
Sticking it up.
It's real narrow, and it keeps it up. And you know how a bank sinker or any kind of sinker or swivel gets in between 2 rocks and it'll pull tight? The bank sinker will slide over that. But like I said, I don't use it a whole lot anymore. But I have some made. I didn't think to bring any, because I very seldom use them now.
So when you fish plastics, do you fish the jig heads, or do you fish like the swimming bait?
I like the swimming
hooks?
baits better because the jig heads, they go down like that and they hit the bottom first. The jig head hits the bottom first, and the next thing you know, you're hung up. And then you try to jig it, and you're snagged behind a shell, or you're in the grass. Whereas the DOAs, they sink like that. And when you twitch it, it kind of jumps up like that. Just like have you ever seen a real shrimp in the water, how it swims? It's hot. And it looks a lot like that. The sinker on a DOA is right there on top of the hook where the bend is, and it's in the center. That's why it's so hard to fish, because it takes so long for it to sink down.
If I was going to be drifting Masonboro Inlet, would it be better for the tide to be coming in or going out?
I prefer the fall, but both are good. You just need to remember on the rising tide, you want to fish on the deep side where it's dropping off into the, well, either way really. You just want to change the place. You want to try to fish where it drops off in the deeper water. On the falling tide, some of these places might be hard to fish, but grass banks on the rising tide, because they're moving up on the rising tide, they'll move up closer to the bank. That's where the bait is. And on the falling tide, just fish for deeper water and the drop-offs and stuff. Points and currents and on any tides. That's pretty much all I got. If you don't have any questions.